Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 8 important articles for a comprehensive analysis. So let's cover all these topics one by one, and the discussion would be as detailed as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from our initiative, do support us with your likes and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's start with the first article from the supplement page, where we have an important article related to science and technology. The Hindu carries a column related to the topic of precision medicine and biobanking. These are important concepts to understand as far as the prelims and even the mains exam are concerned. So let's understand what exactly is precision medicine and what is biobanking and where does India stand in this regard. What is the market for biobanking in India? What is the market size of precision medicine? How can it transform healthcare in the country? And what legal ethical concerns arise from these new emerging technologies in healthcare? And what laws and regulations do we have to govern these new medicines or new age medical technologies? That is what we need to learn from this important article. See, precision medicine is essentially targeted, customized medicine and healthcare. Today, with advances in the field of medicine, science and technology, it is possible to precisely identify the healthcare related problems and deliver precise treatment, and this could be customized to each individual patient. Thanks to advances in genetic technology and thanks to advances in computing, today we are in a position to leverage precision medicine and deliver quality healthcare. So around the world, this is becoming an emerging market in the healthcare industry. Even in India, there is growing traction for precision medicine, which can help tackle genetic disorders, cancers, and even several other chronic diseases, from liver diseases to cardiovascular diseases. So to deal with such life-threatening conditions, to prevent and cure them, precision medicine is the way forward. See, after the Human Genome Project was completed, which brought out the entire genetic sequence, there has been rapid advances in the field of genetic technology. We have new age genetic editing tools that have come up, from CRISPR-Cas9 that provides for precise gene editing to ensure that the desired features are retained and the undesired features in a genetic structure can be removed, to even mRNA based therapeutics, messenger RNA based vaccines. For example, last year's Nobel Prize in Medicine went for a COVID vaccine that was developed based on the mRNA platform. Such new age technologies are possible, new age treatments are possible, and researchers and healthcare professionals around the world are treating several conditions very effectively through personalized healthcare. By using the genetic data, the research data arising out of projects like the Human Genome Project, and by applying this to understand genetic disorders, inherited diseases, today we are in a much better position to tackle several forms of cancers, even diabetes, and as well as other inherited disorders. Around the world, there have been many success stories where healthcare professionals have been able to reverse a few genetic conditions. They have been able to identify certain upcoming health conditions in patients and provide the right precise treatment, thus saving their lives. So these advances are possible because of better understanding of human genetics today. The understanding of genetics and our ability to play around with genetics provides the opportunity to deliver precise medicine, customized medicine which is suited for the individual patient. So this is where biobanks play a very important role, because to bring out the genetic data and enable researchers to work on genetic data, you need enough biological samples to be collected and stored in what we call as biobanks. See, today we have several forms of therapeutics and diagnostics which are coming up. For example, you might have heard of organ on chip. Organ on chip is a revolutionary technology which is transforming drug testing. It is almost eliminating the need for clinical trials or human trials. Drugs and vaccines can now be tested in a laboratory setting where organs on chip can be deployed. Essentially, it is a replica of or a simulation of organic function or the function of a certain tissue which is being targeted by a certain medicine or a drug. So by mimicking the functions of a certain organ or a certain tissue, right, in a lab setting, in a healthcare setting, today researchers are able to bypass the need for animal trials and maybe even human trials. So for such technologies to advance further and to be able to develop precise medicines which can target specific organs, which can target specific cells, advances in precision medicine is absolutely essential, and to carry out those advances you need biological samples to be stored in biobanks which can enable the researchers to identify not just the genetic structure but also to identify the target locations. So this is where biobanks come into picture. In India and around the world, biobanks are making a mark. It is already acquiring a pivotal role in medical research, in pharmaceutical research, etc. Now, if you look at the precise medicine market in India, according to reports, it is growing at a rate of 16% per annum. By the end of the decade, this market is estimated to be as large as $5 billion. So this is slated to be a multi-billion dollar industry, and currently it contributes to around 36% of our national bioeconomy. Bioeconomy is where we employ biological samples and biological processes to generate economic opportunities and as well as employment opportunities, which also helps in enabling better healthcare, providing quality healthcare and timely treatments. So the government of India also prioritizes bioeconomy. In fact, the Department of Biotechnology under the Ministry of Science and Tech has launched a dedicated policy called Bio E3 policy. So please make a note of this for your prelims. Biotechnology for economy, environment and employment, that was launched earlier this year. Under the National Bio E3 policy, precision medicine has been given a top priority. Establishing biobanks has been given a top priority because this will allow India to tap into the biotech industry and leverage the market potential to not only provide better treatment to the patients but also to transform healthcare and create employment, thus driving new economic opportunities as well. So as far as national bioeconomy is concerned, precision medicine already accounts for 36% of the market share. By the end of the decade, this segment is expected to reach a market capex of $5 billion. So there is great potential for economic opportunities and employment opportunities in this sector. And of course, you can't forget the transformation it can bring out as far as healthcare is concerned. Now looking at biobanks, let's understand what do these biobanks actually store. They collect and store a variety of biological samples needed for research, biotechnological research. This could be blood samples, DNA samples, or samples of various organs, tissues, etc. So any sample of biological origin which is stored for further genetic research to enable the development of better drugs, vaccines and treatments. Such a facility which stores them is called a biobank. So around the world there are several such biobanks which are operating. In India there are 19 registered biobanks in the country. If these biobanks can collect a large set of data, a diverse set of data which is genetic data, this will ensure that the advances in precision medicine is more inclusive and equitable. Because if the sample size is restricted, because see, storage at biobanks is very expensive. Not everybody can afford a biobank facility to store biological samples. So since it is not affordable for everyone, if only the rich and the elite are contributing biological samples, the genetic data would be skewed in favor of the rich and the elite, leaving behind large sections of the society. Different diverse genetic groups would be left out, especially tribal communities which are most affected by genetic disorders. That is why the writers are urging the government to step in at the right opportune time to bring in the laws and regulations needed for biobanking and precision medicine. Because compared to other countries, India is lagging behind with regard to its legal and regulatory framework. There is a lot left to do from the Indian government with regard to the required laws and regulations, as there are several gaps that are present when it comes to biobanks and precision medicine in the country. Because when your genetic data is being collected, when your biological samples are being stored and used for research, it is very important to protect the rights of the individuals. Because it's not just about your right to privacy, because this data is personal to you. The genetic data and the biological samples and whatever data is generated from the research based on your biological samples eventually belongs to that individual. So if potentially these samples are misused, or if the data is misused, it could affect your well-being, it could affect your rights. Hence, we need a very robust legal and regulatory framework that will not only enable research, but at the same time, it should protect your basic rights, including your right to privacy and other guaranteed fundamental rights. You need to ensure that the consent of the individuals is obtained before these samples are collected and stored. Obtaining informed consent is absolutely essential. At the same time, the patient or the individual who's donating the sample should be aware regarding how the data will be used, for what purposes will it be used. In India right now, if you look at the registered biobanks, they do host a lot of samples, biological samples. But those who contributed those samples are not even aware as to how exactly their samples are being used, how the data derived from their samples is being employed in the medical industry. So this could be a breach of not just your basic constitutionally guaranteed rights, this could be a breach of ethical codes as well. It enters the gray area of ethical misconduct. If personal data, biological data is misused or mishandled, and if there is no accountability, if no one is held responsible for that, then your rights could also be affected down the line. So that is why it is essential to ensure that we have the required laws and regulations in place. So in India, thousands of genetic samples, biological samples have already been collected and stored, which is enabling scientific research. For example, India carried out its own Genome India project, which was quite similar to the Human Genome Project. Then thousands of samples were collected under the Phenome India project. And to focus on pediatrics, under the PRAGD mission, Pediatric Rare Genetic Disorders mission, thousands of genetic samples, biological samples were collected from young children and infants. So there are thousands of biological samples currently stored in these registered biobanks, which is helping the pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies and the healthcare industry to better study rare genetic disorders, inherited diseases and even complicated conditions, chronic conditions, from cardiovascular diseases to liver diseases to even life-threatening conditions like cancer. This is allowing researchers to develop better treatments, better therapeutics and to come out with customized treatment. But however, the lack of laws and regulation is a concern for the patients and for the industry itself. If you look at other countries, you look at United States, the European Union or even China for that matter, they have very robust laws in place. The regulations are in place when it comes to collection of biosamples and storage of biosamples. But in India, there is a big gap that exists. There is no specific law that deals with the protection of rights of the individuals who are donating biological samples. Only for DNA, a specific legal framework has been created as far as DNA sampling and profiling is concerned. But For biobanking and for collection and storage and research on biosamples, we have no specific law or regulation in the country. So this could even affect the trust of the public in the system. If people don't trust that their samples and data would be protected, they may not even contribute the samples, which could hinder the research, which could impact the advances in the domain. So India needs to draw lessons from other countries. We need to study the regulations of other countries and adapt this into the Indian context, customize them to suit the Indian context. So we should ensure that there is a legal framework that provides the right to consent, meaning without your consent, no biosample can be collected. Informed consent has to be provided by the individual. There should be guarantees with regard to privacy and other fundamental rights. Your samples and data cannot be misused or mishandled, and if it is done, the concerned individuals and authorities should be held liable and accountable, and for that you need data protection. There needs to be authority as well to enforce these regulations and guidelines. That is the need of the hour in India. Given that precision medicine is going to be a huge market in the country, given that this emerging technology will play a critical role in the future, it is important to regulate the entire field of biomedicine and ensure that the patients and individuals' rights are guaranteed and protected. In fact, the Indian Council of Medical Research has recently brought out a handbook called the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical Research. This prioritizes the rights of the participants. So ICMR has brought out a handbook that lays out the ethical guidelines to be followed by the biobanks and the biotech industry. But just a set of guidelines is not enough. You need a set of legally enforceable laws and regulations. So ICMR highlights the ethical issues. It talks about the importance of obtaining informed consent, storing the biosamples in the right way, and making the individual aware regarding how the data and how the genetic biosamples will be used for research. So ICMR guidelines is on the right path, but what we need is a set of legally enforceable laws and regulations, so that if there is any misconduct or any mishandling of the data, then the authority which could be set up can act against it and hold the responsible individuals, the responsible institutions accountable. Liability has to be put in place. When the consequences are defined, this will bring in more responsibility into the precision medicine sector, and especially biobanks would be forced to oblige by these regulations. So writers are calling for a dedicated authority to enforce those laws and regulations, to provide justice to the individuals who have contributed their samples if there are any cases of violation of their right to consent, right to privacy, etc. If there are any ethical violations or mishandling or misconduct of the biosamples, then providing justice to the affected individuals and holding those liable for it accountable is absolutely essential. And for that you need a set of legally enforceable laws and regulations. So this is what we learn and take away from this important article. Now some of you might think, why should we be concerned, worried about having a law or a regulation in place? This is not just about the rights of individuals. If India has to advance in this sector, if India has to play a leadership role, then we need to ensure that we streamline the laws and regulations to enable the biomedicine industry, which is a very lucrative opportunity as well. It can create an economic opportunity, drive employment, and more importantly, it can bring out revolutionary interventions in the medical healthcare industry. So India can actually play a leadership role here, because at the global level, India is already promoting healthcare research and pharma research through various diplomatic initiatives. For example, through the Quad grouping, the quadrilateral, India is working with US, Australia and Japan to focus on pharmaceutical research, vaccine development, etc. Even under the BRICS grouping, there is focus and priority given to healthcare research, which includes vaccine development and as well as drug discovery. So India is considered as the pharmacy of the world. We are the largest producer of generic drugs and vaccines. So any advances in precision medicine and the development of targeted drugs will definitely put India in a leadership role, and that is why we need to take the right measures immediately and mainstream this research and ensure that we align with the global legal and regulatory standards. This could benefit Indian pharma industry and biotech industry to play a leadership role. So we need to work with our like-minded partners as well through groupings like Quad and BRICS, and India has to align its legal standards with the global standards. This is absolutely essential if we have to tap into the precision medicine market. So this is what we take away from this important article. So you can expect a mains question or maybe even prelims question based on biobanking or precision medicine or the Bio E3 policy. Now let's move on to the next article. We have a very interesting article on page number 9 regarding an emerging cybersecurity threat for United States that arises from the rise in Chinese EVs or Chinese electric vehicles. See, today the world is transitioning towards electric vehicles and electric mode of transportation. As countries try to decarbonize their economies, they try to move away from fossil fuels. There is a global shift which is being pushed towards clean transportation, which is primarily based on electric vehicles which are powered by batteries. Now this is where China has a tremendous advantage. China not only controls most of the critical minerals that are needed for battery technology, it dominates the supply chain of critical minerals that are essential for EVs and the batteries needed to power EVs. But China already has a dominating presence in the car market, in the EV car market. It's not just about the battery technology. If you look at the global market share of Chinese EV companies, they are already in a dominating position. I'm sure many of you have heard of Chinese EV automobile manufacturers such as BYD, Xiaomi and others. There are many popular top Chinese EV companies which are not only rolling out electric vehicles in the Chinese market, but they are pushing the exports of EVs around the world, which easily allows China to dominate the global EV market. Now this represents not just an economic threat, but even a security threat, a very real cybersecurity threat for the rivals of China such as United States, and the same could hold good for countries like India as well. As Chinese EV companies dominate the EV sector, the United States has raised alarm. The US National Security Council has already raised an alarm regarding Chinese EVs because electric vehicles are essentially connected vehicles. If you ever experienced an EV vehicle or the new age cars which are coming out, they are all connected to the network. They have a number of smart systems that manage the operations of the car or the battery, and many of these systems are connected to the net, to the web, and thus making it extremely vulnerable for possible cyber attacks, because any electronic device is hackable in today's world. And countries like China, Russia, US, Israel, they have tremendous capabilities to interfere with such systems. This is not the stuff of science fiction, this is already a reality. There have been many cases where targeted operations have been carried out, especially by intelligence agencies and cyber actors sponsored by intelligence agencies, to disrupt such network systems. There have been cases where Israel has meddled with electronic systems and control systems, right, to carry out targeted killings. China, Russia are also alleged to have carried out such interference through the back end of the supply chain to carry out spying and espionage. The United States as well is a leader in the field of cyber espionage, where they can interfere with the software and the hardware and meddle with the systems to not only sabotage, but even to carry out targeted killings or disrupt the economy or even to bring down critical infrastructure. So this represents a very real world security threat for any country. So United States has already flagged the risk as Chinese companies are dominating the EV market. Because see, China provides a lot of support. The Chinese state The PRC provides a lot of state support and subsidies, which has enabled the Chinese companies to dominate the market. And as their global presence expands, the US is getting increasingly worried that if Chinese EVs are allowed to run in the country, if there is large scale adoption of Chinese manufactured EVs, these connected cars could all potentially become essentially a target for Chinese espionage programs. This is a very real risk, not just the stuff of science fiction. Imagine in a world where there are millions of connected cars and there is a threat actor determined to cause damage. They could easily hack into the networks, disable the functioning of the car, or manipulate the functioning, resulting in accidents. So this could enable targeted killings. This is a classic case of supply chain interference or supply chain attacks. China could use its leverage with these companies to meddle with the software or maybe even the hardware of these connected cars. The braking systems are today controlled with electronic devices and softwares which are eventually connected to the network. The overall controls of a car is also connected to the network, from satellite linkages to direct links with the internet with other connected devices. For example, today's connected cars are linked with your smartphone, right? They are linked with home automation systems through Internet of Things or IoT devices. So this could give the hacker direct access to your personal data. They could manipulate the personal data, steal your wealth as well from your banks. By hacking into a car network, they can hack into your smartphones or your home automation devices, steal your personal data, then hack into your banks, wipe out your financial wealth, or disable the cars, cripple the economy, or carry out targeted killings. Let's say there has to be a targeted assassination of a top official. The agencies can ensure that the car owned by that individual is bugged or manipulated, and with the right interruption of the operation of the car, it can result in an accident which could kill the passengers. Or even worse, this could lead to a bigger attack on critical infrastructure, especially power grids. Because see, EV batteries have to be eventually charged. You plug in the batteries to the charging infrastructure, and eventually the charging infrastructure is connected to the power grids, which is a critical infrastructure for any country. So studies have already established that by hacking into critical infrastructure, you can bring down the economy of a nation, thereby directly threatening a country's national security. You can ensure entire regions of a country or multiple cities are taken out of the power grid by such well coordinated, well planned attacks. So if by using the connected cars, if there were to be a cyber attack on an EV vehicle, and if the EV batteries which are plugged into the charging infrastructure are targeted, this could be easily used to manipulate the charging equipment, leading to a power surge or an outage that can take down the entire power grids. And this is a very real possible threat. We have seen this happening recently in Moscow, recently in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Charging infrastructure in Moscow was targeted. Those who were essentially pro-Ukraine cyber groups have targeted charging infrastructure in Moscow. They not only disabled the charging equipment, but they displayed electronic messages on the charging equipment where they were showing support for Ukraine. So while this was a small scale attack, the same could be used to manipulate the charging infrastructure, leading to overall collapse and failure of the power grid to which the charging infrastructure is connected. So this represents a threat to the critical infrastructure of a country. So that is why the US is already taking precautions to shield itself from the looming threat of connected cars. The potential supply chain attacks that countries like China, Russia could carry out against the US has become a national security concern, and the American authorities are taking the requisite action. So this holds lessons for India as well. Because when it comes to cybersecurity, India is often on the back foot. We are always playing catch up with the rest of the world. There have been many instances where there have been cyber attacks on India's critical infrastructure which have been linked with Chinese state actors. Allegedly, Indian power grids have been targeted. Even power plants, including a nuclear power plant, was targeted by a cyber attack, which was linked with foreign state agencies. There have been targeted attacks on the communication infrastructure of India, the port infrastructure of India. So it's high time that India also formulates an approach to deal with emerging threats as we increase the adoption of EVs. It is very crucial to deal with the threats emerging from major suppliers like China. For us, even suppliers from US and Europe could be a threat. So there should be adequate security audit of the foreign equipment, and more importantly, we should focus on self-reliance to become independent as far as these critical technologies are concerned. India is also having ambitious plans to focus on electric vehicles. By the end of the decade, we plan to shift largely towards EV transportation to move away from fossil fuels. So India is heading towards the same path. So it's important to protect the cybersecurity of India, ensure that connected cars and the EV charging infrastructure doesn't pose a cybersecurity threat, especially given our dependency on foreign equipment. So either we have to put in checks and balances through security audits and regulations, etc., or we should focus on self-reliance, or a combination of both. So this is the lesson we draw from this important article. The US is already undertaking measures to ensure that the softwares which are loaded on EV vehicles are pre-checked and ensure that doesn't pose a cybersecurity threat. Also, US is trying to cut dependency on Chinese EVs altogether to focus on domestic EV production. So that is what we take away from this important article. Now let's move on to another column that deals with the Quad grouping and the dilemma it poses for India and China. As you all know, the Quad or the Quadrilateral is a grouping of like-minded democracies. US, Japan, Australia have come together with India to form the Quadrilateral that mainly focuses on the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific is the priority of the Quad. Recently, the Quad leaders held a summit at Delaware in United States, where the Wilmington Declaration was adopted. So the writer of the column is exploring the progress of the Quad, how it counters China and Chinese aggression, and the possible implications for India. As India is seen to be more aligned with US and the Western powers, the writer is examining how will China perceive this India's closeness to the West through groupings like Quad, which is clearly aimed at containing China. So let's take a look at this. This column is written by M.K. Narayanan. That is why the article acquires more weight. M.K. Narayanan was India's former National Security Advisor, as well as the former Director of Intelligence Bureau and a former governor. So his insights is of great relevance for India. So under the Wilmington Declaration adopted during the recent Quad Leaders Summit, the countries have ensured that Quad focuses on its defense and strategic priorities. See, even though India makes it clear that Quad is not a military bloc or not a military alliance, India has made it very clear that Quad is not meant to contain or counter China. It is very evident still that Quad indeed has a strategic priority, which is to ensure that Indo-Pacific is stable, which is clearly a message to China, as China is the threat in the Indo-Pacific for all these countries. Though India ensures that Quad doesn't directly mention China or targeting China, the eventual objectives of the Quad is very evident. The defense strategic objectives are very clear, which is to enforce the rules-based order, enforce international law in the Indo-Pacific. So given rising aggression of China and expansionism, this objective of the Quad could even result in a direct confrontation eventually between the Quad countries and China. So this is where the writer examines to what extent should India align with the West and groupings like Quad, and what precautions should we exercise to not create unnecessary hostilities with China. The idea is about finding that balance, because India follows an independent foreign policy. We don't align with other blocs and military alliances to target a specific country. That is against the very fundamental principles of Indian foreign policy. And more importantly, India is aware that we should not be sending out any wrong signals to China. Given China's military and economic superiority, any perceived aggressive move by India would see a retaliation from China, and given China's superiority, India could take a severe hit. See, it's not just about the border tensions that we have, it goes much beyond that. China does have a clear military economic superiority over India, and India is mindful of that. So when dealing with an aggressive, hostile neighbor with better capabilities, it is important for India to balance and manage this relationship as well, to not unnecessarily instigate or poke at China, because that doesn't serve Indian interests. And also, we need not be seen as allies of United States or allies of a group of countries through groupings like the Quadrilateral. For India, the best interest is served when we strike that balance between these conflicting powers. So this is where the writer is cautioning India to be careful about the messages that we are sending out. See, China doesn't look at India as a territorial threat, because despite the border tensions, the repeated clashes, incursions across the Himalayan border, China knows very well that India doesn't pose a threat to its territorial integrity or sovereignty. So in this regard, even if there are repeated incursions happening, that would be a low scale conflict between both sides, and both sides can even manage that through their diplomatic relations. That's exactly what India and China are doing in Ladakh. Despite the repeated escalation, both sides are working together trying to resolve the tensions, and China knows very well that India doesn't pose a territorial threat, and that is never India's intention as well. So one challenge we face here is to push back at Chinese aggression. This is where we rely on Quad partners like US, Japan and Australia. But the extent to which we depend on them is what determines a Chinese response towards India. India has to maintain that balance where we don't send any wrong, unnecessary messages to China, while relying on support from others to contain or at least to keep Chinese aggression under check in the Indo-Pacific. So the writer says that the Indian strategic establishment has been studying China's mentality, China's psyche from many decades. We have understood what triggers China, what doesn't trigger China. So as I said, the Indian strategic establishment has concluded that minor border incursions, border related challenges will not cause unnecessary concern for China. China knows it can dominate over India, so there is a diplomatic way of resolving those tensions while protecting Indian sovereignty and Indian territorial interests. But however, China will look at India's closeness to US with greater aggression compared to even India's preparedness at the border. Now let's say, for example, India were to step up its military modernization in the border areas, which we have already done in the last 2 decades. Right? India has deployed advanced weapons, more troops with better border infrastructure that gives India a better fighting edge over China. So China knows that, but still China doesn't see that as a major threat, given that China has a military economic superiority over India. It knows India may not be able to pose a direct threat to its territory or sovereignty, and that is neither India's intention. So given this clear perception that exists on both sides, it's unlikely that China will perceive our border preparedness as way too aggressive. There might be low scale tensions, but that may not escalate into a serious tension or a conflict. But India's growing closeness with US and those who are perceived as rivals or enemies of China, that could create bigger problems for India. Because in China's view, that would be seen as a bigger provocation. If India were to be seen as an ally of US or Japan, forming military clubs and alliances designed to counter and contain China, then China will react more aggressively against India in that case, and that is the last thing India wants. The writer is pointing out that Indian interests are not served when we end up triggering China unnecessarily. Yes, we need support from US, Japan and others, but at the same time, we should know where to draw the red line. So as of now, India has done quite well. We have pushed the Quad to diversify, because China started calling the Quadrilateral as the Asian NATO. China saw the Quad as a military alliance, given that the same 4 countries have a bilateral naval exercise, a multilateral naval exercise called Malabar. So China even went to the extent of calling the Quad as the Asian NATO, as a military alliance designed to contain China. But India dismissed these reports. India said Quad is not a military bloc, and India pushed other members to diversify the group. Today it almost resembles an economic grouping. It's focused on trade, it's focused on disaster management, climate change, vaccine development, as I mentioned earlier. So Quad has truly become a diversified group thanks to India's insistence. So this approach of India is ideally suited for Indian interests. That is what the writer is pointing out, where we are maintaining the right balance between US, the West and China, while ensuring we don't unnecessarily trigger China, at the same time getting the required support, strategic, defense, diplomatic support from others to keep some pressure on China in the Indo-Pacific to keep its aggression under check. Because eventually China is an aggressive power, it is an expansionist power. China might say that its rise is good for the world, but Indian strategic thinkers are very clear that China's rise, which is aggressive essentially, inherently, does pose a threat for India. So India needs to take precautions, but this has to be done without instigating or provoking China unnecessarily. At the same time, we need not be allies of US. It's about finding that right balance, and that is the dilemma, the challenge that presents before India. And writer says this could be a dilemma for China as well. Even China might face a challenge on how to deal with India given India's proximity to US. Should China be more aggressive, or should it work bilaterally with India and ensure India doesn't fall into the Western bloc? So this does represent a policy dilemma for China as well, but for India it's of greater concern because if China were to retaliate against, let's say, the Quad countries, if China perceives Quad as a direct military threat, and if it decides to retaliate against the Quad, most likely the retaliation would be against India, given that we share direct borders. So to avoid that, the writer is urging India to maintain those balances in the relationship. Quad countries are essential for Indian interests, absolutely, to stabilize the Indo-Pacific, to keep China under check, but it shouldn't be beyond a point. We shouldn't cross the red line where India is perceived by China as a direct threat. So as long as India manages to strike that balance, Indian interests will be protected on both the sides. So that is what we learn from this important column by M.K. Narayanan. Next, we have an editorial regarding railway safety in India. The subject of railway safety is back in the news because just the other day we had a deadly accident near Chennai. A passenger train collided with a goods train that was parked on the same rail, and this was a pure case of miscommunication, mishandling. This was an avoidable tragedy. Fortunately, there were no deaths, few people have been injured, but in the recent past we have seen similar deadly train collisions with very high casualty rate. For example, the recent train collision that happened in Odisha, right, and the repeated collisions that have taken place over the last decade. There have been repeated incidents. Now such cases can be easily avoided with better technology, with better anti-collision avoidance systems. By deploying better signaling systems, by strengthening the overall railway safety infrastructure. So by taking the required measures, it is possible not only to mitigate these incidents but entirely prevent these accidents from happening. Because direct collision in today's world is almost unacceptable. With the technology available, it is quite possible to easily prevent a direct head-on collision of trains which are on the same track. But despite this, there have been repeated incidents in India which raises concern about railway safety and the priorities of Indian railways. This is where the editorial is suggesting few measures to be undertaken to improve railway safety and to avoid such direct collisions of trains. See, Indian Railways has developed an indigenous anti-collision technology called Kavach. Kavach is an indigenously developed anti-collision avoidance technology which is being deployed on trains and railway networks around the country. But right now, providing a complete coverage has been a challenge for the Indian Railways. Because some of you might think, despite having an indigenous collision avoidance system, why are these accidents occurring? That's because we are not able to install the coverage system across all trains and across the entire railway infrastructure, because there are practical challenges, there are constraints involved. So if you have to roll out coverage across the country, across the railway network, this requires significant capital expenditure. This requires a certain amount of time. This is where Indian Railways is encountering a challenge. See, of late, the revenue of Indian Railways has been falling. Railways has been seeing a decline in its revenue collection. Because on one side, other forms of transportation are getting popular. For example, on certain routes, air travel has become more convenient, cheaper and efficient compared to railway transport. And also COVID-19 pandemic carried out a major disruption, which significantly affected the freight revenue as well. Because apart from passenger traffic, cargo traffic brings in a lot of revenue to the railways. So the pandemic dealt a severe blow to its revenue, and the emergence of alternate modes of transportation and connectivity has affected the revenue of railways. So with limited revenue and with a very nominal increase in budgetary allocation, railways is facing a capital crunch. So it may not be able to roll out coverage immediately. This will be time taking, and also installing it across trains and across the railway infrastructure will require sufficient amount of time and resources. So it's very important to understand that an anti-collision avoidance system is not the only panacea. You can't just depend on an anti-collision avoidance system. That is just one of the methods to avoid collision of trains. Parallelly, railways has to work on improving its signaling infrastructure. In many cases, investigations have shown that rail accidents are a result of wrong signaling or miscommunication. And to promote overall railway safety, the culture of safety has to be promoted. For that, infrastructure has to be improved. For example, railway personnel are overburdened according to studies. Recently, a study has brought out the alarming work fatigue on the train drivers and as well as the station masters and the railway personnel in general. Studies have shown that across sectors, the railway personnel are overworked. Sometimes the shifts extend to 12 to 14 hours and they don't even have basic facilities. They lack drinking water facilities, toilet facilities, which essentially puts the strain and the pressure on the workforce, which could lead to manual errors, which could lead to human errors that can cause accidents. Railway personnel go without food for several hours given the long work shifts, the limited breaks they get. So the lack of facilities, the poor infrastructure in railway stations and on the train as well for the personnel is another alarming concern which can be easily fixed. So instead of just focusing on anti-collision avoidance system, we should prioritize other aspects of railway infrastructure as well. That is how you can improve railway safety. The overall culture of safety has to be built in. You need to improve the infrastructure facilities available for the workforce, especially the train drivers and those involved in signaling. Ensure that they are not overworked, overburdened, so that they can maintain high levels of alert. Improve the signaling system and communication system, which can avoid any possibility of miscommunication. And of course, keep rolling out coverage anti-collision avoidance system depending on the budget available. So if this is done simultaneously, right, maybe over the next few years, India will reach a stage of most efficient railway transportation with high levels of safety, which can avoid such deadly accidents, because collisions are definitely avoidable, entirely preventable. So we should not get obsessed only with anti-collision technology. We should also focus on basics of railway safety like improved signaling, better railway infrastructure and safety culture within the workforce. So this is what the editorial is pointing out. So with this, we have completed all the major columns and editorials. Now let's head towards the prelim section and take a quick look at the smaller articles in today's newspaper. On page number 8, there is a column referring to X-band radars and Doppler radars, which are being deployed in the Wayanad region to track the movement of the top layer of the soil, to provide early warning for landslides, to track the movement of heavy rain-bearing clouds that can bring cloudbursts and heavy rainfall, which can trigger landslides. Because recently Wayanad in Kerala was hit by a deadly landslide caused by heavy rainfall and floods. So IMD, India Meteorological Department, under the Ministry of Earth Sciences, which is the nodal authority for forecasting and early warning, is deploying the right technology, the right radars to track the clouds that can bring intense rainfall, which can cause floods and then trigger landslides. So there are some important concepts that you can understand from this column, which can help you in your prelims. For example, what is a radar? A radar is radio detection and ranging. It is an acronym. It's a short form for radio detection and ranging. It employs the Doppler effect to detect objects. The Doppler effect, I'm sure you would have studied in your school days, when sound waves are targeted towards a moving object, which might be moving towards the listener or away from the listener. Some of the sound waves will echo back, they will reflect back, which can be read by the reader or by the listener. So when you check the frequency of those waves, the frequency varies depending on the distance of the object. If the object is approaching the listener, the frequency reduces, and vice versa. This simple concept of radio waves is employed in radar technology. In fact, this is what many birds and animals employ to detect obstacles. So a similar concept has been employed here. For example, in military defense radars, target objects are detected, tracked in real time, and you can even understand their characteristics by reading the radar signature, the size of the object, the speed at which it is moving, right? Such key parameters can also be determined. So in weather forecasting, radars play a critical role. Doppler radars installed across the country play a critical role in tracking rain-bearing clouds. So IMD is on a mission to step up and modernize the weather forecasting infrastructure of the country. In fact, from 1950s, 1960s itself, IMD has been pioneering the world of weather forecasting. By 1960s, it had installed a series of radars in the country. Most of them were analog radars initially. Later, it switched to completely digital radars. Today, it maintains a network of Doppler radars across the country, especially in focus areas like Uttarakhand, Kerala, Northeast India, etc. So it not only relies on these radars for long-term forecasting of, for example, the entire monsoon season, but it also looks out for emerging cloudburst incidents, which can bring heavy intense rainfall. So accordingly, IMD issues heavy rainfall alerts, color-coded alerts, which can in turn alert other authorities who are tracking floods and landslides. So IMD is deploying more such radars. Recently, the cabinet has approved Mission Mausam. Under Mission Mausam, 2,000 crores has been set aside by the government to modernize weather forecasting infrastructure. Apart from focusing on supercomputers to provide better prediction and modeling, IMD is also installing more and more radars, and most of them will be Doppler radars. So these Doppler radars will come up across the country. Around 56 additional Doppler radars are being installed under Mission Mausam, which is a major upgradation of our meteorological early warning forecasting infrastructure. Then X-band radars are also used, especially to track the movement of soil in landslide prone areas. See, X-band refers to the X spectrum on the electromagnetic spectrum, which is in the range of 8 to 12 gigahertz. So X-band radars are very useful to track the movement of slopes. Geological Survey of India with IMD are deploying these radars in highly landslide prone areas. They use the Rayleigh scattering phenomena to determine the speed at which an object is sliding or moving, which helps in understanding the slope profile and the vulnerability of a slope. Plus, ISRO is working on the NISAR project, which will play a crucial role in Earth observation once it is launched. NISAR is a joint project of ISRO and NASA. So NASA is developing one payload, ISRO is developing the other payload, both of which employ the synthetic aperture radar technology. A synthetic aperture radar relies on L-band and S-band radar and provides very high resolution images. Synthetic aperture radar satellites can even capture high resolution pictures through night time, through cloud cover, and provide very high resolution images that can help in providing early warning during landslides. The X-band radars which are being set up in Wayanad also provide high resolution data to track the movement and slippage of the top layer of the soil. So such new forecasting early warning systems are being deployed to improve our preparedness with regard to disaster management. Now let's look at another important column on the same page, which relates to party symbols. See, of late we have seen several major parties splitting into two factions. So when two factions are formed, one big question is, who will inherit the original name of the party and the original symbol of the party? We saw one such incident in Maharashtra with the Shiv Sena, when Shiv Sena split following a case of defection, right? Which was the original Shiv Sena became a big question, which was eventually answered by the Supreme Court and the Election Commission of India. Now in Maharashtra again, we are dealing with another similar case. The NCP, the Nationalist Congress Party, headed by Sharad Pawar, saw a major split recently, where Ajit Pawar, with the support of several MLAs, split the party into two factions, giving rise to two different factions of NCP. So now again the question is, who will inherit the original symbol of the party? Because see, election symbols play a critical role in Indian elections. Given that a large part of our electorate are still illiterate, they may not be able to read the name of the candidate or the party on the EVM, right? So to facilitate the ease of voting in a ballot box, symbols are still used and relied upon, where parties and candidates are allotted these symbols. So national parties, recognized parties, they have a set of fixed symbols. For example, the palm of your hand of the Congress, the lotus of the BJP. So such national parties, recognized parties, have a fixed symbol which does not change. But smaller parties, symbols are allocated by the Election Commission of India, and this is entirely determined by the symbols order. So what regulates the allocation of symbols is the symbols order of the Election Commission of India. So when there is a split in a party due to defection, the Election Commission has the authority to determine which is the original faction and which party can retain the symbol. But however, this could lead to a lot of subjectivity as well, as Election Commission plays a role in deciding. This could bring in subjectivity and lead to allegations of favoritism towards one faction while creating a disadvantage for the other faction. Because see, in Maharashtra elections are coming up, assembly elections next month. So people who are familiar with Sharad Pawar's faction, right, let's say they associate NCP headed by Sharad Pawar with the clock symbol. Clock is the allotted symbol for this recognized party. But now Election Commission has ruled in the recently held Lok Sabha elections that the clock symbol of NCP will be allotted to Ajit Pawar's faction, as it has been recognized as the original NCP. So Sharad Pawar's faction was at a disadvantage during voting, because illiterate voters might still associate the original party and the leader with the old clock symbol, which has now been given to the rival faction. So this is a valid concern of the other faction as well. Shiv Sena had a similar question which was raised. So Supreme Court in the Sadiq Ali versus Election Commission of India in 1971 had established a three-test formula. A three-test formula, three-principle formula was set up. One, the Election Commission has to determine which of the faction resembles the original party with regard to its aim and objectives, right? Which party follows the inner constitution and the inner party democracy of the original party. And finally, which faction holds the majority in the legislative and organization wings of the party. Depending on these three parameters, Election Commission would rule that this certain faction is the original party which will retain the original symbol allotted, and the other faction will be given a new symbol. So this has been the current practice. But however, as I said, there could be a case of subjectivity involved, and also Election Commission getting involved in inner party politics to look at which party is following the constitution, the primary objectives of the party, to see whether the party is abiding by the inner party principles. That unnecessarily drags election commission into the world of inner party politics. So this could undermine a constitutional authority, its image and the trust the voters have placed on it. So that is why the column is urging the election commission and Supreme Court to come out with a well defined system to determine the party symbol in case of such a split. One option is to freeze the symbol altogether and give new symbols to both factions. This had been done previously with the Shiv Sena, where election commission, using its powers under symbols order, froze the old symbol, the original symbol, and allotted new symbols to both the parties until the matter was decided. But this is a temporary measure. So maybe there is a need for reforms when it comes to election symbols. So that is what the article is talking about. So there are key points over here which can be relevant for the prelims exam. Next, we have an update on Israel's war in Lebanon. Just yesterday I mentioned Israel's attacks on the blue line. The blue line, which was secured by UN peacekeeping forces under the UNIFIL mission. The United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon is a UN peacekeeping force deployed on the Israel-Lebanon border to maintain peace between the two, and also deployed at Golan Heights, which Israel has illegally occupied from Syria. So across this active conflict zone, there is a UN interim force deployed on a peacekeeping role, and according to international law, according to principles of UN Charter, peacekeepers cannot be targeted in a conflict. The blue helmets, as the peacekeepers are called, they cannot be targeted by either of the parties involved in a conflict. So these peacekeepers of the UNIFIL mission who are guarding the blue line have been brought under deliberate targeted attack by Israel, which is a grave violation of international law and the principles of UN Charter. This is what we studied yesterday as well. Now reports have come up that Israeli tanks have breached the gates of the UNIFIL mission at Nakura, which is the headquarters of this UN peacekeeping mission. So this blatant, audacious attack by Israel, right, where it has even started firing shells and missiles targeted towards the blue line, which could even hit the peacekeepers, is a very grave provocation and a major violation of international law. Many countries have condemned Israel for this action. In fact, Israel has gone one step ahead. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has even issued a warning to the peacekeepers to get away from the target zone. Meaning, if they remain in the blue line area and if there are casualties, Israel is saying they are not responsible if there are deaths and casualties. So many countries have condemned this aggressive move of Israel, which targets the peacekeepers as well, and India also has condemned the actions of Israel, as India is a major troop contributing country. Fortunately for us, there are no Indian troops in the UNIFIL mission, but in general, if you look at all the UN peacekeeping missions around the world, India is one of the top troop contributing countries. We have always been worried about the safety, well-being of the peacekeepers, because many Indian soldiers have made the supreme sacrifice, where the fighting rivals, they have targeted the peacekeepers, resulting in many casualties on the Indian side. So over decades, India has lost close to 170, 180 peacekeepers. So India has always pushed for safety, protection and well-being of the peacekeepers. So this action of Israel is not acceptable to most countries, and most of them have criticized Israel's aggression against the UN peacekeepers. Next, coming to the last article for today, as the tensions increase between Israel and Iran, there are reports of US deploying the THAAD battery missile system to strengthen the missile defense of Israel. The THAAD is one of the advanced air defense systems of United States. It stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. This missile battery system provides for automated air defense to take out incoming aerial targets. Could be drones or missiles, etc., can be targeted by the THAAD, and it's mainly meant for area defense. Large swaths of area can be defended, stretching from 150 to 250 kilometers. The missile has a long enough range and large areas can be defended against any incoming aerial threats. Recently, US provided the THAAD batteries to Ukraine as well. So now it is arming Israel to defend Israel against any possible Iranian missile strike. So critics are pointing out that US is adding more fuel to the fire. By arming Israel with cutting edge technology, it is emboldening Israel to use more aggression against Iran, as Israel has sworn to retaliate against Iran following Iran's recent missile strikes on Israel. So tensions are rising in West Asia, and US is arming Israel with the THAAD missile system. US says it is essential to protect Israel, which is threatened by Iranian repeated strikes from Iran. So please make a note of the THAAD. Just know what it is, which country it belongs to. That should be more than enough. So on this note, I complete my discussion for today. I hope you guys have understood everything and liked the session. If you did, please press the like button. Don't forget to share your comments below and do subscribe to our channel. So that is it for today. Let's catch up tomorrow. Thanks for watching.